Welcome, everyone, to another random walk down Mill Street. The topic for this evening is a little bit small, and this is going to be a kind of short class presentation. The topic is interesting and could be researched further, which you'll see by the end. But it's something that I came across only in the last few weeks and months, and thought I'd share it with you. We will not be doing any singing tonight. We will again next week. Next week, I'm going to tell you a little about Shir HaShirim and Pesach, and we'll get you ready for the Passover Haggadah. But tonight we have a short one. So I'm going to share my screen. See if I can do this right. Okay. How do I make it so it's just the slideshow? Here we go. Okay, can you see my screen? Yes, no? Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to also mute everyone. I forgot about doing that. So let's do that. Okay, you can still hear me, correct? Great, excellent. Okay, the topic for tonight is Generous to a Fault. That's the title. The story of Mr. Alfred A. Marcus of Boston. Just out of curiosity, and you can say it, and you can give me a thumbs up, or you can write it in the chat. Have any of you ever heard of Alfred A. Marcus of Boston before tonight? Let me know. I know he's pretty esoteric, pretty small figure, not remembered much, which is why I have chosen to speak about him. And his connection to Shearith Israel, as you'll see, is a little bit minor, but so just to recap, I'm not going to be doing any singing. We're going to be talking about this one person and telling a little bit of his story, and that'll be it. So I expect the whole presentation to last about 20 minutes. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so many of you know that I have from time to time and continually engage in research about the ritual objects of Shearith Israel for a variety of purposes, inventorying for insurance, historical reasons, keeping track of what's kasher and not kasher. Just Shearith Israel has a lot of ritual objects, some of which are in use, some of which are not, some of which are loaned out to museums, and they require keeping track. So I'm the registrar, so to speak, of Shearith Israel's collection. And I come across some things occasionally that are of interest. So a few years ago, we did a project about Sifrei Torah, and I cataloged all the Sifrei Torah that the synagogue has. I didn't do this single-handedly. In fact, I basically used other people's work. Previous Chazanim have had catalogs. We brought in an expert sofer from Israel, Rabbi Goldstein from Machon O, to examined all the Sifrei Torah and gave us some estimates of age and origin, and I put that together, and so that I did that. While doing so, Dr. Poole, our late great minister, wrote a book called An Old Faith in the New World, which is a history of our congregation, and it's a pretty thorough book, and he has a chapter about some of the traditions of the synagogue and some of the objects of the synagogue, and he lists many of the Sifrei Torah, not all of them, but many of them. And I'm going to show you what he writes when he talks about the Sifrei Torah. That is the next page. Okay. Let's put this over here. Oops. Okay. So the first paragraph is where he's talking about the Sifrei Torah. It comes in a long section where he's talking about all the different Sifrei Torah of the synagogue. It says, the small Sefer Torah on 14.5-inch parchment that is regularly used at weekday morning services, that's in 1954 when he's writing, held in the little synagogue, was a gift of Alfred A. Marcus of Boston in 1880. This he gave, together with robes, bells, and breastplate, in grateful appreciation of the address which Dr. Mendes had given to his congregation in Boston in August of that year. So we have a Sefer Torah from Alfred A. Marcus given to the synagogue in 1880 with its appurtenances. Then a few pages later, on page 115, we read the next paragraph. In 1883, Alfred A. Marcus of Boston added to his other gifts a pointer and olive wood handles for the Torah that were made in the Holy Land in the ancient city of Hebron. Okay. And going further to page 120, just keep reading through the book. In 1889, Alfred A. Marcus of Boston added a Megillah to his other gifts of ritual objects. So this one person from Boston gave quite a few objects to Shearith Israel, and that's how I first encountered his name. Actually, that's not perfectly accurate. That's how I encountered his name in connection with Shearith Israel. A few years earlier, in 2012, earlier for me, not for Alfred A. Marcus, who's been long dead. A few years earlier, in 2012, we had some legal issues with the Torah Synagogue in Newport, and I had been doing some research, and I came across the following, which I'm going to read to you. Here we have. This is from a book called The Story of the Jews of Newport, which is written by Rabbi Morris Gutstein, who was the rabbi of Jesuit Israel Congregation, the Torah Synagogue, in the middle of the 20th century. And he was, in addition to being a rabbi, he also was a little bit of a historian, and he wrote several books about the history of Newport, Newport's Jewish community. This one is the most thorough. And in it, you have a paragraph about gifts that were given to the Torah Synagogue over the years. And similar to the way Dr. Poole does it in his book, this one comes first, by the way. This was written in the 30s. If Dr. Poole's was written in the 50s. This is all about Newport. So he wrote, the synagogue, that's Torah Synagogue in Newport, received other gifts, a beautiful breastplate for the scrolls of the law with an inset of 12 stones of different colors representing the 12 tribes of Israel, a Megillah in a Palestinian wooden case, as well as an artistic Palestinian Omer board from Mr. Alfred M. Marcus, that's what it says, I think it's a misprint, it should be saying A, whose family were descendants of the old Newport community. These objects were inscribed in Hebrew and in English. The English on the breastplate reads, this breastplate is presented by Alfred A. Marcus's daughter, Mary Ann, and son Simeon of Boston, in sacred and holy memory of Kate Marcus, God rest her soul, who died at Boston, USA, Nissan 11, 5647. That is 1887, if you're wondering. The inscription also contains the names of the parents of Alfred A. Marcus and his darling wife, Kate. Simeon Marcus died in London, 5612. His wife, Ellen, died in London, Shavat, 5632. Judah Benjamin died in South Africa, and his wife, Marianne, died in London. So Alfred A. Marcus's wife, as well as his parents and his late wife's parents, are all memorialized on this breastplate. The Hebrew inscriptions, which give the date of the deceased only on the box of the Megillah, read essentially the same as the English. From the Hebrew inscription on the breastplate, it may be seen that these gifts were given in 1888 under the ministry of Rabbi Mendes. We don't need to go through the whole history, but the father of the minister here in Shearith Israel at the time, so the minister here in Shearith Israel in the 1890s, 1880s was Henry Pereira Mendes. And when a minyan revived in Newport, he arranged for his father, Abraham Pereira Mendes, to come to Newport and minister there, and he became the rabbi of the Torah Synagogue, which, without getting into great detail, is owned by Shearith Israel. And so that is that. So Alfred A. Marcus, who apparently, according to Morris Gutstein, is a descendant of an old family of Newport, gave gifts there, and as we have seen, gave gifts to Shearith Israel. And so that was interesting to me. Let's see what this note says here. Nissan 11 is the same as the Azkara of the Rambam. Okay, that's a nice date to remember. Okay, we would use the word Nachala here, by the way, just terminology, Shearith Israel terminology. Okay. So these objects are of interest to me, and I have been looking for the Torah Scroll that Dr. Poole mentioned, and I cannot find it. And I wonder if we still have it, or if it was given away or sold, because normally it would have some kind of footprint, some kind of marker identification on it, and I don't see that Torah scroll anymore. But I'll still have to do some research and see if I can identify it. But I do have the Megillah that he gave to Shearith Israel, and it comes in this beautiful olive wood box, which was mentioned by Rabbi Gutstein in Newport, and it says exactly what he wrote. It has the names of the donor and his family, and it has the names of the people who are being memorialized and the dates of their passing. And it also tells you Ir HaKodesh Yerushalayim, which I guess is where the origin of the box is, the olive wood box, probably, or possibly, or probably also the Megillah. And we have the Megillah. It's a long, tall Megillah. I didn't give you the census dimensions here, but it's a nice, big-sized Megillah. And if you're looking at the Ktav here, it's Ashkenazic Ktav, German Ashkenazic Ktav. And you'll also see that it has these little tagin. I don't know if you can see here. The scribal technique has little crowns on letters. There's an acronym to remember which letters get crowns. It's like Shatnez Gat or something like that, where Shin, Shin, Tet, Nun. So you'll see on those letters you'll have crowns. And an old Ashkenazic scribal tradition, which you don't see too much anymore, when you have letters in a row, they would make a little fancy thing with the tagin. Like, so you hear Bishnat, you'll see as a little, it didn't just make two separate crowns. You combine them into one big design. And you'll see, here's another one here, Tet and Nun, you'll get it combined together. You don't really see the scribes doing that today, so it's an indication of the age, which we know the age because it's a gift of Mr. Marcus, but it's a nice old Ashkenazic Megillah that he gave to Shearith Israel in 1888. The other objects, the pointer, the Torah scroll, the wooden staves, I have not located, but we'll keep looking. What about in Newport? So in Newport, the breastplate still exists there, possibly, or maybe even probably the Torah scroll, but I'm not sure. But I know about the breastplate specifically because I've seen it. And here it is. Quite heavy and beautiful with silver, and has exactly as Rabbi Gutstein quoted in inscription in the front in Hebrew and in the back in English, which you can see here on the screen. There's a little more information on this one. It gives you the names of all in English and in Hebrew of all the people, so it's a little helpful if you're looking for the genealogy of this family, which I started to do, didn't get very far, but anyway, here we go. So this is what piqued my interest. Who is this guy? Rabbi Gutstein says he's a descendant of an old family of Newport, but he is coming from London or South Africa or something like that. He's not an American family. So let's see what else we can learn about him, or what else is known about him. Another item from by our I mean Shearith Israel's archives, is a letter that he wrote to the trustees of the synagogue in 1893. And you can see here what's kind of some interesting things is he has his letterhead. So it tells his business's letterhead: Alfred A. Marcus and Son, diamond merchants and importers, purchasers of real estate, landed property, a large stock of diamonds, rough and polished, also precious stones in every variety, always on hand. He's a diamond dealer, but he also deals in real estate, which he writes about on his letterhead. He also has Hebrew on the top. So, and he has this great little thing that says, no business will be transacted or interviews had on the Jewish Sabbath from 1 hour before sunset on Friday until 1 hour after sunset on Saturday, or on the Jewish festivals, and no letters will be opened on those days. So anybody receiving a letter from him knows that this is a Sabbath observant person. He has Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, Tiferet Kol Ha'aratzot, and translated. And then he has his name in Hebrew. So just in case you weren't sure, this is a Jewish merchant from Boston. And he doesn't give the English date. And this is printed on his letterhead, 565. He is writing all his letters with a Hebrew date. this is not only sent to Jewish people. This is his business stationery, and he is using a Hebrew date. So a very interesting person, you can tell just from his letterhead, from his stationery. Anyway, here's the letter that he wrote to the trustees in 1893. President Brandon and trustees of the Spanish Portuguese Congregation, New York City, gentlemen, some years ago I sent to the Reverend A.P. Mendes of New York a scroll of the Holy Law, Omer board, etc., to be used in the services which he was conducting in the ancient synagogue of that city. I desire you and your successors to be guardians of that scroll, and to allow any congregation that you approve of in New York to use said scroll upon condition that the services there shall be orthodox and in accordance with the minhag, which has always existed there and which was conducted by the late Reverend A.P. Mendes. That is to say, the Orthodox Sephardic minhag, yours faithfully, Alfred A. Marcus. So there is some mistake here, because Reverend A.P. Mendes, Abraham Pereira Mendes, never ministered in New York. That was his son, Henry Pereira Mendes. And these items were given to Newport. So I think, and you can also see that the word minhag is transliterated minhei. And I believe that what happened here is there's a secretary who's typing, maybe while he's talking, or maybe from his handwritten notes, and she got it wrong. She wrote Newport, New York instead of Newport, and wrote minhei, minhag. And I say she because that's some sexist. I don't know why. I should have said he or she. But that's what I believe what happened here, because there's some mistakes. But it's a letter that's interesting. And the reason that it was sent is probably because Shearith Israel wanted to make sure the ownership of these objects was clear. I don't know exactly. It's a little bit hard to tell, but that's the letter from Alfred A. Marcus. Doesn't tell us much about him. Well, the letterhead tells us more about him than the letter itself. Now, so I just started Googling who is Alfred A. Marcus, and you'll find that Alfred A. Marcus gave items all over the place, including to somehow President Benjamin Harrison or to the White House or something, because in the Benjamin Harrison Library, this is the President of the United States, there is a book, Hebrew book, that's all they call it. They call it Hebrew book, which was presented by Alfred A. Marcus and his daughter and his son in memory of his wife, Kate. And if you look at it, it is, the printing is very poor. And the picture, not the printing, the picture that was on the website is not very crisp or clear. But it is a Sefer HaChaim on the front cover. I gave you the inside of the cover, but the front cover is Sefer HaChaim. This is a book of prayers to be said at the cemetery. Why this was in the library of President Harrison? Maybe because he died. I don't know. I have no idea why this is in the presidential library of Benjamin Harrison's papers, but it is. But not only that, I mean, that's already interesting enough. But I just give you here two small samples. There are dozens and dozens of news reports all over the place of the generous donations made by Alfred A. Marcus. So here is one from 1888 on the top left. This is from a newspaper, the Jewish Standard, here printed here in America, where it has news from Europe. This is the news from Europe. Mr. Alfred A. Marcus of Boston, USA, has, through Lord Rothschild, presented the Great Synagogue in Amsterdam, that's the Ashkenazi Synagogue, with a handsome silver shield set with jewels. Sounds familiar. Sounds like the breastplate that we know from Newport. And here is a book. There is a printed book. This is just from the Google. I couldn't get an image of it. This is just the title of it. A printed pamphlet, probably, which is the Order of Service at the Presentation of a Sefer Torah to the Southeast London Synagogue by Alfred A. Marcus, Esquire of Boston, Sunday, July 5th, 5651, which is 1891. And it's in Hebrew and in English. These are just two examples. So he's giving items in Holland, he's giving something in London. He gave a Torah scroll to Sydney, Australia. He gave a Torah scroll to the Sephardic congregation in Jamaica, along with bells and cloak. He gave a piano to the Montefiore Hospital in New York and to a hospital in Philadelphia. He gave a Sefer Torah to the Hebrew Home for the Invalids, or something, I forgot the name of it. All over, and from the 1880s and 1890s, he is giving Sifrei Torah and other ritual objects and other cultural objects all over the place. The whole world, not just Boston, not just the East Coast, the entire country, the entire world, he is sending things out. So one can imagine that he is he's not a poor man. He is a wealthy person who is sharing his wealth in this way with the world, the Jewish communities throughout the world. He is like Moses Montefiore, who also sent Sifrei Torah to all sorts of Jewish communities around the world. Or a more modern example, his name is escaping me. All right, if I think of it later, I'll tell you. But there was a member here actually who passed away recently, a new member here who is, or now he's deceased, is friendly with Rabbi Soloveitchik, who made it his mission to give a Torah scroll, to donate a Torah scroll to a Jewish institution every year. So every year he gave a Torah scroll. Every year, dozens and dozens of Torah scrolls given. So this is a man of great philanthropy. Now here I have a quote from a book from Jacob Rader Marcus. Jacob Rader Marcus has a. This is going to tell the whole story, by the way. This is I wanted to tell it in newspaper clippings, but I ended up not. So this is from a book from Jacob Rader Marcus, a volume on Eastern European immigration to the United States, and it's talking specifically about Boston. And I'm going to read it to you because it's such an interesting story. Okay. In 1889, the year that Ramaz, yes, that's Ramaz Margolis, who we know from the East Side, came to Boston. Oh, yeah, sorry. In 1889, the year that the Ramaz came to Boston, one of the outstanding Orthodox laymen in Boston was a man by the name of Alfred A. Marcus. He had arrived in the city about 1867 from South Africa, hence the name by which he was known, Marcus der Afrikaner. Sounds not like a Newport Sephardic family. He hailed originally from London. His wife was a Belasco, apparently a Sephardi. He came with a daughter and a son, arriving in a sailing vessel which almost foundered in a terrible storm. He ascribed his escape to the fervent reading of Psalms. Marcus, a wealthy man, set out, it would seem, to pattern himself on Moses Montefiore, who was still alive. Generous to a fault, Marcus distributed scrolls of the law to needy congregations. A handwritten scroll was no small gift. Marcus had a synagogue of his own. Simulating the heavens, the ceiling was painted blue. It had a silver moon and golden stars. The newcomer was at his height, this newcomer, meaning Alfred Marcus, in the 1870s and 1880s. But it would seem his fortune faded in the 1890s, possibly in the depression of that time. By that time, he had lost his daughter, his wife, and his son. He was left bereft. When his family died, he erected the largest tombstone in the cemetery. His ending was sad, for he died a pauper and was buried by public subscription, meaning there was no money in his estate to pay for his burial. He was penniless. And his friends and family, or he didn't have much family, they had already predeceased him. His friends from the community had to pay for his burial. And they buried him under the tombstone, which he had earlier put up for his family members when his fortune still smiled upon him. In 1889, now this is fascinating. In 1889, Marcus the Afrikaner installed one of the first telephones in that part of Boston so that his daughter at home could say Kaddish for her mother. The telephone, so this is one of the first telephones in Boston was installed so that a woman could say Kaddish. Just let that sink in for a little bit. One of the first telephones ever installed in the city of Boston was installed for the express purpose that a woman could say Kaddish. There are so many things that are interesting in that. The telephone was in the synagogue, and when the time came to recite Kaddish, it was taken off the hook, and she recited this traditional prayer. For some reason, the daughter could not leave the house. Maybe she was an invalid, I don't know. This particular incident, which is authentic, was typical of the adjustments being made to American way of life in some Orthodox sanctuaries. Marcus was no religious rebel. He was devoutly Orthodox. So, yeah, that is the story of Alfred A. Marcus. And it is so fascinating, I had to share it with you. It requires some more research. But here is his tombstone. And as you can see, or maybe you can't actually, it's a little small, but it has his name in English on the bottom, Abraham Marcus. But the top part, which is in Hebrew, is not about him, because this stone was installed for his wife and children. And only after his death did his community get together and bury him here, and added this inscription to him on the stone. This is an amazing story of the opposite of a person who had fabulous wealth, who had personal tragedy and apparently financial tragedy, and died penniless. But not in mitzvot. He was malei mitzvot karimon. He gave Sifrei Torah and Tashmishe Kedusha all over the world. And while I don't think anybody really remembers him, I'd like you to know his story, because we remember him here, and I think more people should know his name, the fascinating and amazing and sad story of Alfred A. Marcus. And that is my story for you. Which cemetery is this? I think it's called New Hope or something like that. I will look it up. If you send me an email, Diane, I don't know your email. If you send me an email, I will get you the name of it. It's in Boston. I'm going to stop my share, and I'm going to stop recording. Actually, if anyone has any questions or comments, I'll take them. I think we can end the recording here. So tune in next week for a more liturgically based class. But I hope you enjoyed this one.